This chapter of my life began with an unexpected rental agreement. After my divorce, the huge house felt empty. So, I thought, renting out the upstairs apartment wouldn't be a bad idea. A little extra income, and having someone around would ease the loneliness. When I first met Jack, I knew he was exactly the kind of tenant I needed. He was in his mid-50s, with salt and pepper hair, strong hands, and a quiet, polite demeanor that instantly put me at ease. He worked mornings at a bakery downtown. There was a calmness about him, like he'd seen enough of life to never get too ruffled by it. He moved in the following weekend. From the very beginning, Jack's thoughtfulness impressed me. Every Friday morning, he'd bring me fresh pastries, still warm. "Extras," he'd say with a smile, as if I didn't know he was going out of his way for me. He fixed the leaky kitchen faucet without my even asking, cleaned the gutters after the first heavy rain, and even helped me assemble a new bookshelf I'd bought on impulse. And oh, the way he smelled. A mix of fresh bread, coffee, and something woody, cedar maybe. Every time I passed him on the stairs, my stomach fluttered a little. At first, I didn't think much of it. Just harmless attraction, I told myself. It had been years since I'd been with anyone, and Jack had a mature quality that I found appealing. He wasn't trying to impress me, but his simple kindness won me over. Then, there was the night I caught him in a tank top, fixing the garden gate. His broad shoulders glistened with sweat, and the muscles in his arms flexed as he worked. I couldn't stop staring. That was when the little spark of attraction turned into something more primal. So, there I was, nervously setting the dinner table one Friday night, my heart pounding in anticipation. Jack had accepted my dinner invitation. When he walked in, carrying a bottle of red wine, I knew my plan had worked. His eyes lingered on me a little too long, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed. We ate, we talked, we laughed. Jack told me stories about his time at the bakery, how he'd learned the craft from his grandfather. There was something so calming about him, so deeply reassuring, that I almost forgot my plan. Almost. By the time dessert was finished, I leaned back in my chair, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't pretend anymore. "Jack," I said softly, my voice steady despite the nerves buzzing under my skin. "Would you like to stay a little longer?" I wasn't sure how he'd respond, but when he stood, crossed the small space between us, and kissed me, I knew I'd made the right move. His lips were firm, deliberate, with the kind of confidence only an older man could have. "I've wanted you," he murmured against my lips, his voice low and rough, sending shivers down my spine. His hands were strong, but gentle, pulling me closer, as if he'd been waiting for this moment as long as I had. When we finally made it to my bedroom, my heart was racing. My body felt like it was buzzing with anticipation. Jack didn't rush. He stood at the edge of the bed, looking at me with this deep, smouldering gaze. "Undress for me," he said, his voice low but commanding, his hands resting on his hips. I wasn't used to being told what to do in the bedroom. It sent a delicious thrill through me. My hands shook as I reached for the zipper on the back of my dress. Slowly, I slid it off my shoulders, letting the fabric pool at my feet. When I stood there in nothing but lace panties, Jack's eyes darkened. "Beautiful," he murmured, stepping forward and trailing a finger down my arm. "Lie down." He guided me toward the bed. His movements were unhurried, as though he wanted to savor every second. His lips traced a path from the corner of my mouth to my jawline, lingering just below my ear. Each touch was deliberate, his hands exploring with a tenderness that made me feel both vulnerable and cherished. When we finally came together, there was no rush, just a steady rhythm that felt like an unspoken conversation between us. Jack moved with a quiet intensity, his hands cradling me as though I were something precious. The connection was deep, emotional and overwhelming in the best way. When it was over, I lay there breathless, thinking surely that was the end. But Jack wasn't finished. As I rested on the bed, my body still humming from the first encounter, Jack's voice pulled me from my thoughts. "Come here," he said, his tone a mix of warmth and command. I sat up, and before I could process what was happening, he lifted me, settling me into his lap. His strong hands anchored me as I straddled him, my knees brushing against his thighs. The closeness was electrifying, and when he kissed me again, it was deeper, hungrier. His lips moved down the side of my neck, pausing at the sensitive spot where my pulse raced. I shivered as his hands roamed my back, drawing me closer until there was no space left between us. This time, his movements were more fervent, his grip on my waist firm. As he guided me, there was a push and pull to it, a rhythm that built steadily until I couldn't die back anymore. My hands gripped his shoulders as a wave of emotion and sensation overtook me. When it was over, I rested my forehead against his, thinking surely this was the end. But Jack still had that glint in his eye. The night was far from over. By the time Jack reached for me again, I was sure my body couldn't keep up. But his steady presence gave me a newfound energy, and when he guided me onto my knees, his hands resting lightly on my shoulders, I felt a thrill shoot through me. "Trust me," he murmured, his voice soft but firm. His lips found the back of my neck, and I melted under his touch. His hands slid down my sides, holding me in place with a strength that felt grounding. Each movement was purposeful, his body connecting with mine in a way that felt both intimate and exhilarating. There was a raw energy to this moment, but it was never rushed or careless. His lips returned to my shoulder, planting soft kisses as his hands steadied me. I could feel the tension building between us, each motion drawing me closer to the edge. When I finally collapsed onto the bed, my body trembling from the intensity, Jack leaned down and kissed the back of my hand, his breath warm against my skin. I was certain I couldn't move another inch, but Jack wasn't done. This time he pulled me into his arms, his touch gentle and grounding. "Let's take it slow," he said, his voice filled with tenderness. He cradled me close, his body pressing against mine as we lay side by side. His fingers brushed a strand of hair from my face, and I couldn't help but marvel at the care in his touch. When he kissed me, it was unhurried, his lips lingering on mine as though he wanted to memorize the moment. There was a quiet intensity to the way he held me, his hands tracing soft lines along my skin. Each kiss was like a whisper, a reminder that this wasn't just about passion, it was about connection. I let myself get lost in the rhythm of it, the steady warmth of his touch, and the way his breath mingled with mine. When we finally reached the peak, it was gentle, like waves lapping against the shore. The first light of dawn began to filter through the curtains, casting a soft glow across the room. I was utterly spent, but when Jack reached for me, his touch was so tender that I couldn't say no. He pulled me onto my side, wrapping an arm around my waist and pressing a kiss to the back of my neck. "Just one more," he whispered, his voice like a quiet promise. This time, there was no rush, only a sense of reverence. His hands rested lightly on my hips, guiding me in a way that felt both steady and safe. His lips brushed against my ear, his breath warm and comforting as we moved together. The world outside faded away, leaving only the quiet intimacy of the moment. When we reached the end, it wasn't with fireworks or fanfare. It was with a deep sense of satisfaction and connection, as though we'd shared something far greater than the sum of its parts. When I woke up, the sunlight was streaming through the curtains, and the smell of coffee filled the air. My body ached in the best way, a reminder of the incredible night we'd shared. I found Jack in the kitchen, humming softly as he flipped pancakes. He turned when he saw me, his face lighting up with a warm, boyish grin. "Morning," he said, handing me a cup of coffee. I took it, my fingers brushing against his as I smiled. "Morning." As I sat at the table, sipping my coffee and watching him move around the kitchen, I felt a deep sense of peace. Jack wasn't just a tenant anymore. He was something more, something I hadn't realized I was missing. Whatever the future held, I knew one thing for certain. I didn't regret a single moment of the night before. Desire doesn't always look like what we expect. When have you found connection in the most unexpected moments? Share your story. Like, subscribe, and let's celebrate those unexpected turns that remake our lives.